I'm gonna click on record. Recording. Is it recording? This should be recording. If
Yeah,
this isn't recording, then I don't know
it
what
is.
to do. Alright, I'll shut up
It
now.
is. It is. Chill. Yeah. Okay. The format I'm going to talk about today is Australasian Intervarsity Debating Championships, or more popularly known as Australs. Australs are a major. Major is like there are 4 or 5 competitions with extremely high prestige, which are known as majors. So Australs is one of them. Australs is mainly held in Australia and Asia, which is why Australasian. It's very similar to the AP. There are a couple of things different. However, we won't be talking about what's different. We're here more to discuss about AP principles and how they work. So don't worry if a couple of things are different. I'll talk about that. But that's not what the main idea is here today. Uh, so let's start with the format, and this is going to be a quick revision of what Asian parliamentary already looks like. Something I expect most of you have already done in the debate competition. There are three speakers. First speaker, first affirmative, then the second speaker goes first negative, then second affirmative, then second negative, then third negative, followed by negative reply, and followed by affirmative reply. In AP, all these speeches are 7 minutes long, with reply being 4 minutes long. The differences in Australs, number one, the first three speeches of each team are 8 minutes long, and secondly, no PO is involved. Those are the two major differences, but we won't take care of that for now. The major ideas, there are three speakers and 4 speeches in total, and the affirmative team obviously agrees to the motion, and the negative team obviously disagrees to the motion. So, what does speaker roles look like? What are the three speakers individually supposed to do? The first speaker is supposed to define the topic. We'll get more into definition later when we talk about argumentation principles. I think definition is very important and something most beginners get slightly wrong. We will talk about the first, again, we come to it later. The second thing a first affirmative speaker is supposed to do is talk about the affirmative team's model. This model basically is like, for example, in certain kind of motions, we expected to give an implementation. So if this house would implement X law, you have to talk about how this law is going to be implemented, what all constitutes in this law, and that kind of stuff. So that's basically your model. So if you're trying to basically if you're trying to pass a policy in a debate, how that policy looks, what you're going to do in that policy, all of that comes within the team's model. A model is not necessary for every single debate, which means sometimes you will have true false debates. And I'll talk about that later. Obviously, over there, if you need to prove something true, you don't need to talk about its implementation. You just need to talk about whether it's a correct thing or a good thing or a bad thing. So models are not always applicable, but if they are, it's a first affirmative's job to provide that model and explain a bit of it. Uh, a first affirmative is also supposed to give an outline of all the arguments that the affirmative team will present. So most of your arguments will have like probably have a theme around them, or basically if you're going to have like 4 arguments within your first 2 speeches, it's important the first affirmative speaker gives an outline on what your case looks like. So the reason for this is it provides a lot of clarity to the adjudicator as to what's going to happen, what this team is actually going to speak about. So it's very important that even if you don't completely like these 4 points, all 4 points obviously cannot be explained by you in detail, but you still provide that level of outline. And then you provide substantive arguments, which means you provide actual arguments and talk about why they're important. So on. I'll talk about more about substantive arguments in argumentation again. The first negative, number one, if necessary, will challenge the definition provided with the first affirmative, which means you do not need to challenge that definition if you feel that definition is unfair and you have proper grounds of proving that that definition is unfair. It's only then you can go up and challenge the definition. If the definition is reasonable, if the definition is acceptable by both sides, that is great. You don't need to challenge it. It's not very important. But yeah, you can go ahead with it. Uh, what next? Second, they have to provide the negative teams model. For if the negative team also needs if it's a policy debate and the second negative team feels the need to implement a different kind of model, where again, a negative can do 2 things, right? Number one, this house would implement policy X the affirmative team will come up and talk about how they will implement the policy, and they will say these objectives will be obtained by that policy. Opposition can come up and do two things. Number one, either A or both. They can do say either A, that policy sucks and this is why it will not work out, or that this is why those objectives will not be achieved, or they say B, we have a better policy to implement or to achieve those all those objectives that affirmative are talking about, and we can do it in a better manner. At that point, they provide a model, they provide an alternative policy. They say we will not implement the policy affirmative wants, we will implement a different policy, and here is a model for that policy. A model is basically again talking about the implementation for that policy. So again, this is also sometimes known as a counterprop, where you basically proposition is saying something, you say, oh no, we have a better alternative to that. This is called a counterprop, and you provide a model for that, basically explaining how it works. You, as first negative, you also have to outline the arguments present within the negative team speech. So again, negative will also have their own constructors with their own substantive points. You have to outline those. Your job is also to rebut whatever the first affirmative has already said, or and finally again present the substantive arguments, or present after you've done outlining all the points. You also take 2 3 and provide proper substantive material to them. Again, I'll come to substantive in argumentation. Second speakers, both sides have a slightly simpler job. Number one, they have to rebut the arguments made by their own side, by the other side. You have to rebut those arguments. You also have to defend your own side's case, which means when the as second affirmative, first negative will have rebutted. So you defend your own side's case. You back up your first speaker. You talk about why what they said is still right, and the rebuttals do not hold. You also poke holes in their other team's arguments. You rebut those cases. You and the second thing you do is provide substantive arguments for the topic. As second speaker, you provide substantiation on 2 levels. Number one, you can bring up new points, where if your first speaker did not talk about all points, you bring up the new points in a debate and talk about how this is relevant, and basically give substantive material via new points. I'll come to this again later. The second thing you can do is provide elaboration or provide more analysis into your first speaker's points. Again, analysis and all will come later, but basically, if the first speaker has made an argument, but they were not able to complete the argument, if you feel like there is some logical links missing, or that argument can be better explained, the second speaker comes up and provides a lot of explanation. So even if the first speaker has made some level of incomplete arguments, it is the second speaker's job to complete those arguments and make sure they stand better in the debate. That's number one. Number two is bringing in new arguments. So that's what second speaker is supposed to do. Third speaker is supposed to present this overview in the debate, which basically looks like what are the clashes in this debate, what are the points of contention. This means identifying the issues on which both the teams are opposing to each other and where they basically disagreed, and talking about why your own team wins on those issues. They will rebut whatever came out in the other team. They will again defend their own team's case. They cannot bring up new stuff. However, they can defend what has already been brought up, right? So basically, if the first and second speaker brought up something, and the opposition try to rebut it, third speaker can come up and prove why the rebuttals are wrong. However, they cannot bring up new material, as in they cannot bring new things into the debate. Just prove why whatever said till now was already correct. You can use examples and stuff for this, but you cannot bring up brand new arguments as such. The reply speaker for both sides just provides something called a bias summary, in which you paint this narrative of a case in the favor of your side winning the debate, which means you show what are the main clashes in the debate. You show how your team has proved to be better in these clashes, and therefore show that your side is winning. Again, reply speakers cannot bring up new points, and neither can they rebut whatever has been brought up. It's just plain summary. Nothing new can come up in reply speakers. Any questions to that? Okay, I assume no questions. Feel free to unmute yourselves at any point of time. Uh, I think all of you know pretty much about how topic selection works. You're offered three topics, or you are supposed to veto what. Yeah, go on.
How do you identify the burden of the debate? Because in a debate motion, there can be quite a few things that can be debated about. So how do you identify that?
All right, I'll come to burdens later. It is a part of my listing. I'll come to burdens a bit later. Yeah. So then let's when we come to motion selection, I think most of you know you will be given three motions. You will have to give first preference to one motion, second preference to another motion, and veto a third motion. If both teams have vetoed different motions, that means whatever is the remaining motion will be debated. If both teams have vetoed the first motion, I mean, won't veto the same motion. If you both have a same first preference, then that motion will be debated. If you both have alternating first and second preferences, then there will be a coin toss. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You will be given 25 minutes to prepare. This 5 minutes for motion selection, after which you have to select a motion, and 25 minutes to prepare. All right. In a debate, you have to be persuasive in order to win. Persuasiveness comes through multiple things, and again, I talk about this when I talk about substantiation. Uh, Persuasive looks like when you're giving an argument, that argument should be number one, relevant, number two, well analyzed, number three, give it weight properly in the debate, and number four, be exclusive. All these parameters I will talk about a bit more later on, but basically, to judge whether an argument is good or not, it needs to be persuasive. And there are certain metrics for persuasiveness, which I will talk about later. So, what what does persuasion look like? So, number one, like I talked about, relevance, right? Uh, if you look at like point number one, one could stand in debate and be persuasive about anything at all. So, if the motion is about this house regrets the Chinese debt traps, for example, debt traps, you cannot start arguing about how ice cream is the best food. That is persuasive. You can make sense and be persuasive, but that's not relevant. Correct. Which means whatever you are speaking about, whatever you are arguing about, must be relevant to the debate. And that's what burdens are about. Burdens determine what is important to argue about and what is relevant. I'll come more to this later. There are a lot of ways a speaker can be persuasive. There's no one set metric, no metric in the sense there's not one set way that you have to follow steps X, Y, Z to be persuasive. However, there are obviously metrics to judge how this happens. Average reasonable person. This is an adjudicator from an adjudicator standpoint. The adjudicator is an average reasonable person, which means they do not have specialist knowledge, which means I know AI exists and machine learning exists. However, I probably know they take data and make something new. However, I don't have specialist machine learning knowledge as to for example, what this algorithm exactly, what how this algorithm exactly works, or what are the parameters of this algorithm, blah blah blah. So if you are arguing, assume that the judge does not have any specialist knowledge, which means if you are using some specialist knowledge, you have to explain that knowledge, but be more often use normal logic to persuade this person, because this person does not assume anything. This person is not insanely smart about any topic. So you have to use logic to sway them. You have to use logic to convince that person. If you want to go much more in detail, again, I will send you this document. It is around 40 pages long. It's very interesting. So this goes a lot into detail. What happened?
It's very interesting. 40 pages long.
Yeah, that's short. Anyways, it talks a lot about what persuasive matter looks like, how exactly, what is exactly persuasive and what's not. It talks about a bit about style as well, which I really don't want to get into. Technically, there are three things in speech. They are called matter, manner, and method. Matter necessarily looks like the content you are speaking about. Manner is your presentation style. Method is the overall strategy you use, the how you structure your speech, how you maintain your time, and all that kind of stuff. How clear your speech is. So example, for example, matter is the content you bring. So you can have three very good arguments. However, method is how you structure those arguments, how those arguments link to each other, how you provide clarity within those arguments. If your method is not good enough, your matter will seem like a mess. So method is also important. Manner is your style of delivering them. As to how much clarity you have in a debate, I will not go much into this. These things are not individually very important, which is to say, having good matter manner method is good, but just having good manner but not having good matter sucks, which means you can be an amazing speaker, but if you don't know what you're talking about, then your argument sucks. You can have insane matter, but if you're not able to present it well, then obviously that speech will not be as impactful as it would be. So this thing talks about how to make your matter, manner, and method better. I encourage you go through this, but that's not what this thing, like this session is about. Then let's talk about burdens and types of motions, right? A burden is basically what are you supposed to prove in a debate, which means if I am arguing on, like if I'm making argue, I'll okay. Let's go by example. A burden is basically something you're supposed to prove on a debate. Burdens are equal and opposite. This means if affirmative team has one burden of proving X, at the same time, a negative team has a burden of proving not X, which means that if the affirmative team is supposed to do something, the negative team must do the exact opposite of that. And we have the same expectations from both teams to do it. So if team X shows that something is more important than something else, then the opposition team must show that no, the other thing is more important on an equal level. You do not give preference to one team, or you do not give them lesser or more burdens. You give them the equal and opposite amount of burdens, and you have to expect them to fulfill those burdens. These burdens can be number one, implied by the topic, which means I will come to this. So for example, if a motion talks about this house would let's go to the motions itself. I think there'll be, anyways, burdens come in two levels. Number one, they come on they're implied by the topic itself, which means the motion asks you to prove some things. Number two, teams themselves can take up burdens, which looks like if you talk about like if you give me one constructive, you have the burden of proving that constructive to its fullest extent. So whatever, just give me a second. Okay, let's continue. So, burdens taken up by yourself. Burdens taken by yourself means if you make an argument, that argument obviously has some level of presumptions, which is, for example, wait, again, we'll get to this. Yeah, let's take the example here. For example, if the topic is this house believes that assassination is a legitimate tool of foreign policy, wait, I'm unclear, policy, the negative can argue that the assassination is a severe breach of international law. For this to be relevant, a negative has a burden to prove how that illegality renders an action illegitimate, right? So what this basically means is if negative brings up a new argument talking about how something is illegal, they also have a burden to prove why something made illegal also means it is illegitimate. So basically, if you are making a constructive, here you are taking up this level of burden on yourself to prove how something will be illegitimate. Yeah, go on.
I just wanted to ask about what is the difference between this illegality and illegitimate. I don't see much difference.
Okay. See, again, that is going way into the debate. Something can legitimacy means justifiable. If something is legitimate, it is justifiable. Something that is illegal can still be justified. So if what opposition have to do is them saying, listen, uh, this is illegal, but we also have to prove that this is unjustifiable. For example, I'll give you a real life example. The US invaded Iraq and basically took down Saddam, right? They basically made sure that Saddam was murdered, or yeah, their military intervened and like they sponsored the rebels and whatnot. Basically, they invaded Iraq and made sure that Saddam died. At this point, that is illegal. However, US were able to somehow were able to get away with it because they proved it's legitimate, because Saddam was such a bad leader and he was uh, he was like basically using chemical weapons and all of that stuff. But basically, the point is, legitimacy and legality are very different. Legitimacy is proving that something is justified. Legality is whether the laws allow for it or not. So even if you do something against the law, you can prove that it's legitimate. At that point, a negative team, for example, in this debate, then have the burden that okay, we have proved that this thing assassination happens. Assassination is illegal, but they also need to prove at the same time that it is unjustifiable for any team to do this. At that point, they have to bring arguments about how something be illegal is also illegitimate and unjustifiable. That at no point at ever can you ever justify something that is illegal, and that is a burden of proof on them. This is a slightly complicated example, but yeah, does that make sense?
Excuse me. I know, but
Yeah.
I have diverted the topic a little bit, but please just clear this one doubt. What I meant to say
Mhm.
is, when the affirmation says that this, I in my particular in this case, I agree with the affirmation. But if
Mhm.
the negation can't put up any argument, right? Because that case, the affirmation they are taking is pretty strong. They can't divert from the topic and give some sort of other example.
Uh, I don't understand your point over here.
No, I mean
See,
to say
because
that if the affirmation is putting up such an argument which can't be like breached, then what kind of negation they like don't feel strong debating, right?
wait, first
Uh,
of all, one second. I can't hear you. Give me a sec.
Someone is
Yeah.
scratching something because of which the other person can't be audible.
Okay, wait. Go again.
what I meant to say is in this particular aspect, like if the negation can't, like they need to give an argument which is pertaining to this particular example of what you told about some sort of like Saddam's assassination, but they
Yeah.
can't just go about giving some other example, right? Like illegitimate actions are, I mean, illegal. I mean, illegal actions are illegitimate, whatever. They can't divert from the topic and say whatever they want.
I don't
So that's
understand how this is diverting from the topic. If they can give logical reasoning as to why legitimate, how all illegal things are also illegitimate, they have a burden of proving this. And if they give logical arguments, example, I don't see why they're moving away from the topic.
I have a
That's it.
question.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Sorry for interrupting. We can carry.
It's fine. You're not interrupting, asking questions. Yeah, someone else had a question.
Yeah, specific to this Saddam Hussein example.
Yeah.
So if what if the counter would this be a valid counter that Saddam Hussein was killed after a war trial, like after a trial in Iraq itself, and therefore this particular example shouldn't be in the purview of the debate?
Not necessarily, right? Because he was still assassinated in the sense. Listen, again, this is not exact. Uh, wait,
I
let's
mean, I'm
rewind.
just asking if
Yeah,
this
at
is
that
a
point.
rebuttal because it's like a bit based on definitions in that
Okay.
sense.
It's a rebuttal in the sense that if you're talking about assassination alone, I think that's a decent rebuttal about you can as government argue that this was not necessarily an assassination because they went through a trial and that's how you frame it as government. If we are talking about just illegality and illegitimacy, I mean sorry, legality and legitimacy, I think at that point this is government arguing, right, that even if something is illegal, it can still be legitimate. Therefore, opposition has the burden of proving how it's illegitimate. That is a valid counter if you're talking about assassination in general, and you can argue that this is not in the purview of assassination. But if you're talking about this, whether legal and illegitimate are the same thing, then this argument doesn't hold.
Right. That makes sense. Thanks.
Because it's still illegal. Anyways, let's move on. So burdens exist on two levels. Three levels. Number one, motion itself. Number two, taken up by yourself. Number three, given by the other team. So basically, again, if opposition prove to me that if illegality is also illegitimate, then government naturally have this burden to prove it is legitimate. So if a team proves something, you obviously have the burden of disproving that, which is basically rebuttal. So burdens exist on three levels. Number one, motion giving it to you. Number two, if you are making an argument, you have the burden of proving it to its fullest extent. Number three, if opposition makes an argument, you have a burden of proving that's wrong. So these are what burdens look like, and these are basically things you're supposed to do in a debate, right? Let's, where is it? Okay, wait, I think.
Just another question regarding to that example of that motion. Is that
Yeah,
like,
go
may I
ahead.
ask? Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
So what if the proposition says something like that any legitimate tool of foreign policy will be, we consider a tool of foreign policy.
You cut off in the middle, I can't hear you. Shashwat, I can't hear you if you're speaking.
Yeah, I think you cut off.
Can you put in the chat, Raghav? In case you can't hear us?
Yeah, I'm doing that. Yeah, I've sent him a message via that Zoom private thing.
Thanks.
I think we can continue, right? Because
Yeah, I was googling something. I can't find
okay,
it. One second.
cool. Oh, Shashwat's back.
It's connected for some reason.
It's fine. Yeah, you were asking.
Yeah. So suppose as proposition, I in the like during the setup of the motion, I say something like that any tool which is effective, any tool of foreign policy which is effective is justifiable and therefore legitimate. Is that a valid thing to say / do?
Listen, that is a constructive, which means you also have the burden of proving why everything that you have to give me analysis as to why everything that is wait, can you repeat the whole thing?
That any tool of foreign policy which is effective is legitimate.
Okay, see, that is an assertion. That is to say, you are just assuming that anything that is effective automatically becomes legitimate. At that point, you have to prove to me why anything effective is legitimate, and why you can do anything and still call it justifiable or legitimate. That is the burden of proof on that argument. That single
And
line
what-
itself. Yeah, go on.
And like, what if you set this up like a definition of some sort?
Yeah, that's the problem, right? And I'll come to this later. There was a problem with most teams I saw in December debate, is that definition is not mean you can just define anything to be whatever you want, and therefore it's true. I've come to what an actual definition looks like and why it's important. but you cannot define things to randomly be definitionally true. That then the debate makes no sense because then you can't argue it if you just assume everything to be true. Definition is something different, and we'll get to it. I can't find the types of motions for some reason. I don't know. Anyways, let's go over them. There are multiple types of motions. Uh, Give me a sec.
Your screen is not visible. Did you stop
Yeah,
sharing it? Okay.
yeah. Give me a sec. Yeah. All right. There are multiple types of motions. Why can this not type? Yeah, this.
Will?
Abhijit, Raghav, remind me if there are any other types of motions.
Yeah. Hey, I'll just go through the motion bank right now, actually.
Anyways, I think these are the most types of motions. So first of all, we have THBT. This house believes that. How this house believes that motions work is essentially these are true-false motions, which means, for example, just a very basic example, this house believes that abortion is justified. At that point, you, as affirmative team, you have to come up and put a truth value on this and prove why abortion is justified. At negative team, you have to come up and talk about why abortion is not justified. So basically, these are basic true or false motion where you are given a statement and you have to prove the truth value as affirmative, and as opposition, you have to prove that there is no truth value. This statement is false. This house THR is this house regrets. This house regrets motions are slightly different. So these are retrospective motions. For example, the most recent one I had was this house believes, this house regrets the rise of US intervention. No, this house regrets the drop of US interventionism. So basically, what this looks like is it's a retrospective motions, which means in this debate, for example, the affirmative has to come up and talk about why the drop of US interventionism has been bad for all of the world. This so basically they have to draw a parallel, which is to say, if the US did not drop its interventionism, then things would have been better off. And right now, because they have dropped off their intervention, things are comparatively worse off. And then they have to give me something called regret metrics. Regret metrics are reasons why you regret this, and so they will give me examples. They can talk about how the Middle East has become much more volatile now that US has left Iran and Iraq. There are much more power struggles in Iraq, and therefore it's much more volatile. Blah blah blah. So regret metrics basically look like you giving me reasons why you regret it. These motions are retrospective, which means you have to prove that in case this did not happen, something else would have happened, and that something else would have been much better off. For example, in this one, they proved to me, the team proved to me that if the US did not drop off in retrospect, if the US had not dropped off, if they had still been in Iraq, there would have been much more, comparatively much more peace in Iraq. And therefore, we regret that US dropped its level of interventionism. So that is what this house regrets motion looks like. THP is this house prefers. Yeah, go on.
Can I ask a doubt?
Yeah, of course.
So essentially, is there a bigger burden on proposition to defend their case than there is on THR motions?
Then again, listen, all burdens are equal and opposite. So it's not like they have a higher burden. Here, this house regrets is slightly harder as government. That is true because you have to prove why in retrospect things have been worse off. And yeah, so it's kind of harder to do it, but like burden in the debates are equal. Opposition has the burden of proving why things that are going on as right now are number one good, and number two, any alternative that might have happened, which government are trying to push, that alternative would have been worse off. So the burden's the same. On government, you have to prove that status quo sucks, and we regret the status quo, and alternative would have been better. On opposition, you have to prove that the alternative is great. Sorry, the current status quo is great, and the alternative government are trying to propose would have been worse off. Does that make sense?
So government is always obliged to set up an alternative?
Yeah, in a regret motion, you have to show counterfactual, or like the actual debating word for it is counterfactual, and they have to show how an alternative is better. That's how you prove that. Otherwise, listen. For example, if I say I regret XYZ, but opposition can come up and say, listen, even in an alternative, XYZ is still going to happen. So what you're regretting is going to happen all the time. So you're not actually. That's not something like, even if US did not intervene, or like Iraq, for example, they talk about how Iraq is screwed now that US is left. Opposition can come up and tell me, listen, even when US was there, Iraq was screwed because of all the rebels and all the insurgency, which means the political instability in Iraq was always bad. So it doesn't matter whether Iraq left, if US left Iraq or not, because on both sides of the house, US or the final impact is that Iraq is still struggling because of political instability. Therefore, on both sides of the house, this is going to happen. Therefore, you are not regretting anything. Whatever you are regretting did not really make a difference. So therefore, whatever regret metrics you're giving me are kind of useless. Does that make sense?
So the metrics only have meaning if there's a counterfactual.
Yeah, you have to show in the counterfactual that these metrics did not happen. You have to show that your arguments are exclusive, and that if a counterfactual was presented, then all these regret metrics would not have happened in that counterfactual.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. THP, this house prefers. This is very basic. This house prefers X over Y. So they will give you X or something. So for example, one sec, I had this debate this was a finalist debate. Give me a sec, I'll just search for it. Yeah, so there's something called eudaimonic, this is philosophy motion, yeah, so it's going to be annoying, but there's something called eudaimonic happiness. Eudaimonic happiness looks like living life in the pursuit of human excellence. This looks like self-actualization, personal expressiveness, and striving towards self-improvement. So basically, eudaimonic happiness looks like you trying to become the best version of yourself, while self-improvement and reaching that level of human excellence. Hedonic happiness, on the opposite side, looks like you pursuing a life that gives you as much pleasure as you want, while generally trying to avoid any painful experience. Which means if you, for example, if you have an exam tomorrow, someone who prioritizes eudaimonic happiness will try to study their maximum, will try to become the best person they can while studying, and therefore they will probably study throughout the night. Someone who is pursuing hedonic happiness, if they don't feel like studying, if they feel like watching Netflix will make them happier, they're going to choose Netflix over studying that night. And then, yeah, that's practically it. So eudaimonic happiness looks like you pursuing that happiness that comes by becoming better versions of yourself. Hedonic happiness looks like happiness you do at what gives you instant levels of pleasure. So the motion was, this house prefers a world where people prioritize eudaimonic happiness over hedonic happiness. A prefers motion, basically, again, here I have X, eudaimonic happiness, I have Y, hedonic happiness, and you just have to compare the two. Prefers motions are very simple, as in they're just a cost-benefit analysis. You have to show that what's happening on your side of the house, for example, eudaimonic happiness, is going to be a better world than a world where you have hedonic happiness, where everyone is following whatever their version of happiness. So you have to prove on which side of the house people are better off, on which side of the house society is better off, and if you're able to show that benefits are better on your side of the house versus compared to the harms on their side of the house, then you win this debate. This is a very basic comparison level of debate. Does that make sense? I'll assume yes. THS is this house supports. You basically, for example, this house supports the rise of third-rate feminism. Then you talk about why affirmative has to talk about why whatever. This is kind of the opposite of a regret, where you have to show why whatever has happened is great, and therefore it's good and it's led to good things. Opposition has to prove that whatever has happened sucks, sucks, and is leading to bad outcomes. Alternatives are not that. Alternatives are not that necessary in supports motions, but they are encouraged. So you talk about how whatever has happened is great, and if this had not happened, it would have sucked. So this how support is basically pointing out the good stuff in a particular action, and of negative has to prove that it was bad stuff and not good stuff. That's pretty much it. Basic. This house as are normally known as actor motions. Actor motions are very interesting. So basically, how it works is that you have to prioritize one person. For example, if you people, okay, I think this is a way too complicated example. Just give me a second. Yeah? I'll find an easier example.
But Rohan, all of the as motions will end with believes that or regrets or supports or something like that only, right?
Yeah, but it's very different. I'll explain. Uh, so here's a motion in the context of an upcoming US presidential election. This House, as a left-leaning journalist, would choose not to positively portray any conservative policies. So basically, what this debate is about is you are a left-leaning journalist, and there an election is coming up, and obviously there are some liberal policies, there are some conservative policies. You will not, you would choose, like, the conservative policies can be good or bad, but as a left-leaning journalist, should you portray those conservative policies nicely if they are good, or portray all conservative policies as bad? So that is the debate. The reason why this is different is because this House, as a left-leaning journalist, which means all the impacts that you're going to give, all the arguments you are going to give, must be in the benefit of this left-leaning journalist and what they want. At that point, you have to characterize to me. I'll talk about characterization later, but you have to characterize to me what this left-leaning journalist looks like, what this person wants in life, and at that point, you have to prove why positively portraying conservative policies will be good for this person or will be bad for this person according to whatever their motives are. So this House as means you are an actor. You take the position of someone, or you take the position of person X or country X, and you have to do a cost benefit analysis for them and prove why affirmative has to prove why passing the motion will be better off for this person alone, and negative have to prove why it's going to be worse for X. So in general, you don't. So, for example, in a THPT, you can talk about how this is good for society or this is bad for society. In this, you cannot do that. So, if you have multiple stakeholders, the person themselves is the most important stakeholders, and all other stakeholders are irrelevant unless you prove they are important to this person. Okay, so basically everything needs to be from the context, like you're thinking like that person, the debate is going on in their head, and you have to prove why it's going to be best for that person and that person alone. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm hoping that it does. This house wood is the most basic ones and the most popular ones you see. This house wood is policy in motion. This looks like you have to implement a policy. Give you an example. Yeah, so there was this debate. This house would ban the contracting of athletes for single game contracts. So basically, there's something called single game contracts, where you sign an athlete, hey, come play for us for one game, and then you can leave. That's a contract. So this house would ban this. Means you have to prove, number one, why this should be banned. Number two, you have to prove what this ban looks like. Like why, how are you going to implement this ban? Is the ban going to be everywhere? Is it going to be only in the major leagues, not in the minor leagues? Blah, blah, blah. So you have to talk about implementation. The model thing I talked about is very important in this house wood motions. In this house wood, you almost always have to give me that model, and you have to explain how the implementation is going to happen of a certain policy. So here the policy is banning of single match contracts. So you have to explain to me how that policy is going to happen, and you have to explain to me why that policy is good. Opposition have to prove whether policy number one is bad, and number two, either give me a counter policy or like give me a counter implementation of another policy, or have to prove to me that this policy will not work out. So that's how this House-Wood motion works. So these are the implicit burdens of every motion. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a
Uh,
question.
Yeah, go on.
I'll wait for whoever's asking.
okay, my question is, isn't it like, isn't it better if opposition doesn't set up a counter model, because then the burden of like proving how the counter model is better and the burden of like showing the faults in the proposition's model is there, right? So it becomes harder for opposition to win the case. Isn't it better just to defeat proposition's model?
Okay, I will talk about this in rebuttal. There are two, as negative, you can do two things. Number one, you can prove they're wrong, or number two, you can prove that there is a better way of making things right. It's not always easy to prove that their side is wrong. True, it is harder work, as in you'll have to make more arguments and stuff, but sometimes it's much easier in the sense sometimes you cannot prove like, sometimes whatever government in like some kind of debates, whatever government will implement will be good, will be for the general good of society. However, you at that point you cannot prove that no, that thing is going to be bad for society. However, what you can prove is, listen, we have a better method of making society better. We have another method of making society better, and this is that method, and this is going to be more useful for people. This is going to be much easier for people. So therefore, depending on the motion, you can take, again, this is the burden you set upon yourself. You can take the burden of just taking down their arguments. You can also take the additional burden of proving that you provide a different kind of world, which will make it better. So true, while it's harder, number one, you're more likely to win because you're able to show a better alternative than what you are able to prove that government is bad. So team affirmative is bad, and you prove a better alternative. You don't necessarily need to do it, but if you're able to do it, that's a very plus points on you.
The House vote motion,
Yeah.
since we have to present a policy and its implementation, does the, like
Mm-hmm.
as the proposition say, so does the
Mm-hmm.
proposition get to decide to some extent what the House would be? Like, can they say that it's the so and so government, or say it's a feminist organization, an arbitrary feminist
No,
organization?
no, no, no. That becomes an actor motion. This house means affirmative. Affirmative would implement this policy. So, for example, this house
But
would
in
implement this.
I'm sorry, but
Go
in
on.
what capacity would they implement it? Wouldn't that be important to the debate?
Yeah, that you can define. That comes within your model. That we will implement this to a certain capacity.
So isn't that indirectly defining an actor?
No, not necessarily. I'll tell you why exactly. So, for example, this single contract athletes, for example, someone assumed in a different debate, someone assumed that this house is the BCCI, and therefore they only gave examples of Indian athletes. That's problematic because this house would motion of this house would ban something. You're talking about all countries banning single house contract. So as this house, you can assume you're a sports federation, and you can talk about how like relevant stakeholders like audience or actor or players are effective, but you can't necessarily limit yourself to the BCCI. So that's why I don't say assume you are an actor or something. Just in general, think of yourself as a body that has the ability to ban something, and talk about why that ban is important and how the ban will be implemented.
So basically, the in that particular motion, you said that it can be an arbitrary sports. Basically, you cannot specify it to a particular sports federation, but a sports federation in general. That's legal, basically, right?
I mean, don't do it. I don't see any benefit of doing that in the first place. Your job is to implement a policy. It does not matter where the policy is coming from. You just have to implement the policy. Number two, you have to identify the relevant stakeholders, as in who's important in this debate. That also does not require you to be any governing body. That just requires you to know who's affected. So there's no use of defining yourself as a sports federation or X or Y or Z.
Understood. Understood. Thanks.
How long is the session? I think it's like 1.5 hours long. So I'm almost halfway done.
Okay, yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Go on.
Yeah, so firstly, So when we're making models and stuff, right, to what extent does that have to be like airtight kind of? Okay, I'll give you an example. So one of the motions we had in the tournament was this house would give like more votes based on how well you do in a current affairs test. And the model the government didn't really define whether this is going to be like an online exam or an offline exam. But let's say they said it's offline, and the other house comes and says, "Where are you going to get the paper?" Is that really a burden that government has to take, or can I kind of just throw that under the bus and say that's not important for this debate?
Yeah, you can throw that under. Again, listen, I think that happens a lot when people are giving rebuttals. When you're trying to give a rebuttal, don't try to, especially against a model, don't try to point out the petty stuff like, oh, you won't have enough paper, or how will you distribute paper. You have to argue their major points. So, for example, in this debate, the major point from government side would be only educated people should get a vote, because if people are not educated, then like politically educated people should get a vote, because if people are not politically uneducated, they might make wrong decisions. At that point, you have to argue against that constructive and prove why that is false or false or a bad idea. Do not try to argue on small stuff like getting paper. So it needs to be airtight in the sense your arguments need to make sense, but small stuff like getting paper is naturally assumed to be right.
And secondly, yeah. And secondly, this house opposes is just opposite of this house supports, right? There's no, like, you argue it the same way.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, like that as well. THO is this house opposes. Or THR and this house regrets and this house supports are not very similar. I mean, are not opposites of each other. This house supports and this house opposes are the opposites of each other. So that was a mistake on my end. Any questions? The difference between THR, this house regrets, like I talked about, regrets is retrospective, which means looking back, if this had not happened, things would have been better off. This house opposes means something that is going on is doing something bad. This house opposes is not retrospective. You are saying, listen, this is doing harms right now. This house regrets is retrospective, as in we are talking about how things could have been different if something would have played if that had not happened. Any other questions? Okay, assuming none. I see some stuff on the chat. Rahul, what are you talking about? To prove that it's bad for the mentioned person or for anyone else? Which motion are you talking about? In this house, as opposition has to prove it's bad for the specific person only. So again, this house as means imagine the debate is going on in that person's head. At that point, a government has to prove that, listen, this is the best thing for the person and their motives. Opposition have to prove to me that this is not good for their motive. So if this person wants to do X in life, this is going to be counterintuitive. Like this is going to be doing this would not achieve what this person wants to do in life. So you have to focus on the person and not society in general. But you can characterize this as saying the person cares about the general society, and if this is bad for society, the person will also feel bad. That you can bring in other stakeholders as long as you prove they're relevant to the main stakeholder, but everything ties back to how this is going to impact the main stakeholder, which is the actor in this debate or whoever you're playing. I hope that answers the question.
Rohan, how long will this session go for? There's a question in the chat.
I told now. I'm halfway done.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. That means just saying that means it's gonna be a 2-hour session.
I have a debate at 8. I will finish before 6:30. I finish in like 30 minutes more. No?
Okay.
30-40 minutes more.
If you have a debate at 8 India time, that means you only have like 20 minutes, right?
What?
You have a debate at 8.
Macha, it's 5:40 in 50 minutes. 5:50. Yeah, chill, not 20.
Huh? Am I blind?
Yeah.
Oh yes, I'm blind.
There are 50 more minutes. Don't worry.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Okay. let's move on to argumentation. Again, this is where I'm going to use most of my jargon. So please, again, please, I hope you're making notes. Let's talk about definition. Definition is not a big problem I saw is people arguing that, listen, this is definition, so therefore it is true. That is not what definition looks like. Definition looks like you identifying what the important issues in a debate are. I'll give you an example. Yeah, so like this house would ban, this house would ban, okay, there's no definition here, but in general, this house would ban the contracting of athletes for single games. There are multiple things you can do for the definition. You can talk about what this ban looks like. So this ban can be a blanket ban, this can be only on major leagues, this can be on minor leagues. Opposition can talk about how a certain kind of ban is unfair, but you cannot completely warp the, you cannot completely say that, listen, because we're doing this, this has to be true. For example, okay, I don't want to take out names just in case, but something when you're defining a motion, please stick to the main objective of defining a motion is to find out the pertinent issues. So when you're defining something, you are basically talking about, listen, we want to ban this in major leagues. If you're talking about only major leagues, you can say we want to ban this in major leagues because we identify these exact problems in major leagues and we want to fix these problems. And banning will help us fix those problems. So what you're doing by defining is not making something inherently true. You're trying to bring more clarity into the debate by identifying important issues. Therefore, for example, we had a motion about, I think this was December semifinals, and this was yeah, about erasing of memories. There was this motion about erasing memories where the person where the motion was this house would allow people to erase memories, right? One team comes up and talks about or defines a motion as saying there will exist this AI which will magically detect what those memories, and if the person does not want their memories erased, the AI will not erase those memories, but tell the government that, hey, I have erased this person's memory. So the government will, so the number one, the AI will detect consent. Number two, the AI is capable of lying to whoever created it. That is an example of a bad definition. I'm not, if that person who defined it is in this debate, I'm not like calling you out and saying you're a bad debater, but in general, that is an example of a bad definition, simply because number one, you are making up stuff that is not what a definition is. Because number one, you're creating a brand new AI which does not exist. But like even then, that is not what definition is about. Definition is about highlighting issues and how you can solve them, and you're in general supposed to give literal definitions. You cannot conjure up randomly new things and just call them to be true. That is very problematic. Okay, second thing, definition can exist in multiple ways. Number one, you actually defining some words. So you're talking about ban. So example for ban, you talk about what this kind of ban looks like, how it's going to be, what exactly that ban is. The implementation of the ban itself is your model, which means we will ban using XYZ. That is not the definition. There's a difference between definition and model. But so while the definition is trying to talk about how what the issues are, the model will talk about the implementation itself. So how you're going to exactly ban it comes from model, but what this ban exactly is and why it's important is something that comes with the definition. Definition can also look like a place set and time set. So for example, there was this really interesting motion. So there was some, if you guys like have read up a bit about the independence, I think it's in textbooks also, there's something called the Chori Chora incident. In the Chori Chora incident, basically what happened is people revolted, like the non-cooperation movement, Gandhi's non-cooperation movement is going on, and some people turned aggressive and they, I think they burned down a police station. So at that point, what happened was Gandhi called off the non-cooperation movement altogether. That means throughout India, he said, I am cancelling entirety of the movement because these few people turned violent. So the motion was, this house asked Mahatma Gandhi, would not stop the cooperation movement after the incidents of Chauri Chaura. Uh, at that point, when the government defines a motion, they can put a time set and a place set. Here, a time set would be a time set looks like us debating right after the Chauri Chaura incident. That means you cannot take arguments from now. You cannot talk about all the independence, like India finally getting independence after. You cannot talk about all the events have happened till now. They are setting this motion in right after Chauri Chaura. That is called a time set. So that they say, listen, it's unfair for us to argue about everything that has happened now because Mahatma Gandhi did not know how it is going to play out after, how his actions are going to result. Therefore, the time set for this motion is the incidents right after Chauri Chaura, and that is when this debate takes place. That is a called a time set where you basically define the timeline in which, like, what exact time this debate is taking place in. Number two is called a place set. A place set is basically you setting up a particular location. For example, in this debate, or the place set is obviously India. Sometimes place sets are important because, again, like I talked about, definition is for highlighting problems. So if a debate, you can talk about how this debate is place set in developing countries because they are the most important, because they are the most vulnerable in this motion. So that is what definition looks like, where you're setting a place. We're talking about why these people are the most important ones, and therefore we define this motion to be about these people. So what a definition does is limiting the scope of the debate to talk about the stuff that is important in the debate. It's not defining things to suit the government. Like, it's not basically just saying assume these things to be true and then only we will debate. It's not that. A definition is supposed to limit the scope of a debate to highlight the most important problems and issues. Therefore, sometimes, very rarely, you need to place a time set to make sure that whatever you're arguing about is relevant to the debate, is true to the debate. And that's why sometimes you'll have to define words to make sure that this debate is about something relevant and not something else altogether. That's why definition is very important. Any questions?
Rohan, can I ask something?
Yeah, of course.
I just wanted to ask what your take about this particular topic. That I just wanted to ask if two teams are of the equal capability and same power, do you think they have a slight edge if they are in the affirmative side?
Obviously, no. The entire point of debating is nobody has a slight edge. You have to prove yourself via like your debating skills. If both teams have the same debating skills, then you have to just choose the team which is slightly better, because nobody can be literally equal in all aspects.
No, no. What I meant to say is because they can limit the scope of the debate, right? Whatever definition they say, we have to go by their definition.
Okay,
If we
no.
have debated.
Mhm. Okay, see, that's where definitional challenges exist, right? Basically, the point of a definition is to make sure that you limit the scope of the arguments to things that are very important, correct? Or the issues that are important. At that point, opposition can challenge this definition by saying this definition is unfair because it's leaving out some important issues, or it is too constricting, that's only focusing on a very small subset of issues. The opposition can challenge the definition if it's unfair.
Yeah, cool. I was not aware of that ability to challenge the definition for the
All
opposition.
right, all right. Yeah, no worries. Anyways, any other questions? Okay, moving on. There's something called characterization. Characterization is very important as it talks about who are the people in the debate and what do they look like. What do I mean? For example, in that motion, this house asked Mahatma Gandhi would cancel the non-cooperation movement after the incidents of Chauri Chaura, right? So at that point, characterization looks like you explain to me what are Mahatma Gandhi's motives, what does that person want, like what is his priority. For example, government can come up, his priority is achieving freedom. That is true, but it's much more important to Mahatma Gandhi that this freedom be achieved through a non-violent manner, which means uh, the Chauri Chaura set a bad example, and if we continue, then people will continue being violent. If we don't cancel, people will continue to be violent. Therefore, because Mahatma Gandhi's biggest like the thing he wants the most is to achieve non-violent freedom, therefore we should cancel the Chauri Chaura movement. That is an example of argument. So characterization looks like you describing the stakeholders and what is important to these stakeholders. For example, in the athletes motion, where is it? Yeah, this house would ban the contrast singer. I got like the characterization that came to from opening government here was that listen, sport is a lot about emotion, and therefore people value sport because the emotional value it brings us. And what single game contracts are doing is taking away that emotion from the game. Therefore, they are bad. So they were able to characterize what is important about sport, and therefore why banning this is good for sports in general, and why it's important. So this characterization looks like talking about the stakeholders and what the stakeholders want, and why passing the motion or rejecting the motion will be more beneficial for the stakeholders. Does that make sense? Any questions? All right, moving on. The next thing is called frameworks and metrics. Framework is basically how are you supposed to view this debate. Framework is a bit more abstract, but there are multiple things that are important in a debate, right? Like, for example, in the happiness debate, I talked about, where is it? Eudonic. Wait. One sec. Yeah, in eudaimonic happiness versus hedonic happiness, uh, here the framework, for example, there are multiple frameworks to look at this. Government can tell me that the framework for this is utilitarian. Utilitarian means where you can maximize the utility of all people, or where, for example, if you guys know the train problem where like 5 people are going to die, but if you press the button, like if you pull the lever, then only one person will die. The basic trolley problem, or that a utilitarian framework would argue that you should pull the lever because one person dying is better than 5 people dying. That is a utilitarian metric, right? Another metric, what opposition can argue in that, if we were talking about debating about pulling the lever, is that that one person was never going to die in the first place. It's the 5 people's fault for being on the track where the train was supposed to be. So what you're actually doing is when you pull the lever, is you're sentencing that one innocent person to death who was not going to die. You're basically choosing to kill him off. Those 5, if you did not exist, those 5 people were going to die anyways. You choosing to pull that lever is you basically sentencing that one person to the death. That is another framework. That is another framework in this debate, or another metric in this debate. At that point, you have to basically at that point, government have to prove that this debate should be viewed from a utilitarian metric, and therefore we should pull the lever. Where opposition are trying to argue, no, the metric that we should judge this debate by is whether innocent people live or not, and therefore we should not pull the lever. So that is what a metric looks like, where you show what is important in the debate and what framework or what ethics or what framework are you using in this debate, and that is why your arguments make more sense. Any questions? Okay, just to reiterate, because I think it got a bit messy, metric is basically things to judge this debate by. Should you judge, should the adjudicators judge this from a utilitarian perspective? Should they judge this from a different perspective? It's the burden of these teams to provide the metric in the debate and prove that this is the most important metric and this is what the debate should judge by. And therefore, using this metric, all our points prove that we are succeeding this metric and therefore we should win this debate. Burden I've already talked quite a bit about, and that's pretty much it. Coming to persuasiveness, and this is constructives, right? Constructives need to be persuasive, like I already talked about. Persuasiveness looks in 4 parts. Number 1, relevance. Number 2, analysis. Number 3, weighing. And number 4, exclusivity. Let's go with this. Number 1, I talked about relevance. Relevance is obviously important because, like I talked about, you can argue about the most absolute random thing in the world, and it might be true. But if it's not related to the motion, you get 0 points. So whenever you are making constructive, whenever you are making an argument, you have to prove it's relevant to the debate. You You have to prove that's important and like it's important to the debate and it makes sense. That's number one. Number two, analysis. Simply saying a sentence is not enough, right? You have if you are making a point, it has an inherent burden for you to prove that point, and you have to completely analyze that point, which means you have to make logical arguments. You have to take logical steps and prove why this is likely to happen. So, for example, every argument will be based on some what do you call this? You will why am I forgetting the exact word for it? It's based on a set of assertions or assumptions. Basically, you assume two, three things. For example, I can assume people want to be happy, and then make an argument on proving why this is going to be happy, why people are going. Uh, okay, wait, let's reset. For example, I make an assertion that people want to be happy in life. Second, I say X makes people happy in life. Therefore, X is good. That on itself is not enough because of there are some clear logical links missing as to how X will make people happy in their lives. Correct? At that point, you have to provide logical reasoning why doing X will make people happy, or maybe it does something or it does the other thing. Basically, I have to prove using logical reasoning why X would make people happy. And that is analysis where you basically explain your arguments. So you cannot simply assert things. You cannot simply say X will make people happy, therefore this point makes sense. You have to prove to me how X makes things people happy. And that is analysis. Weighing. Weighing is important because, for example, you give me, you say if we ban X, there are certain benefits. Uh, then opposition comes up and says, okay, but if you don't ban X, there are also certain benefits. At that point, it's kind of a stalemate because I don't know which benefits are more important, which are less important. So you might try to rebut their arguments and prove why some benefits might not happen. But usually in a debate, it's impossible for you to rebut all of their arguments because it's not necessarily a debate. Then, if one side is able to so clearly prove that everything on their side is great and everything on the other side sucks, that then it's not a debate. That's just a badly framed debate, right? Therefore, there will be some benefits on your side of the house. There will be some benefits on the other side of the house. Weighing basically looks like you proving to me that the benefits you are getting on your side are much better. This weighing can be these benefits A are more important to the people, or B these benefits reach to the more important people. So if you're talking about like money distribution, government can come argue how this is better for poorer people, and opposition can come up argue how this is going to be better for richer people. Then weighing looks like you government coming up and telling me, listen, even though opposition affects richer people better, we believe that poorer people deserve more money because they are suffering from a lack of money, and therefore money is more important to them, and therefore weighing it out, any benefits that come to poorer people are going to be much better for us than benefits coming to richer people, because richer people already have enough money. That is what weighing looks like. You showing why your arguments are much more important in this debate. Either they provide better impacts or they provide impacts to the more relevant people. That's what weighing looks like. Exclusivity looks like you proving whatever is happening only happens on your side of the house. So, for example, if you prove that this house, if we ban X, then we get this benefit. If opposition is able to prove that same benefit while showing that this does not need to be banned, there's nothing exclusive about your argument. There's nothing special about your argument, because even if you don't ban it, then also this is going to happen. So therefore, that argument will obviously not stand up, simply because this is not something you achieve exclusively on your side. Therefore, there's no benefit of banning the thing, right? So you have to prove the exclusivity of your argument, which means you have to prove that only on your side of the house is banning X will result in this particular benefit. That is basically what exclusivity looks like. So for any point you make, you have to make sure that the point is relevant, it's well analyzed, you provide proper weighing and prove why it's important in the debate, and you prove why it's exclusive in the debate. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay, assuming none. The last thing I'm going to talk about is rebuttal. Rebuttal is on two levels. Rebuttals is number one, competing, number two, clashing. First, I'll talk about clashing rebuttals. Clashing rebuttal is basically you trying to prove that whatever points the other team has made are wrong. So if government say A, like give me point A, and opposition come up with a rebuttal and prove why point A is either not going to happen or going to be bad, then they basically that's a clashing rebuttal where they're able to take down that point. That's one kind of rebuttal. The second kind of rebuttal is a competing rebuttal, which is like if government say we will implement X, which will give A benefit, opposition can come up and say no, but no, we will implement Y, which will give the same A benefit, but in a better manner, or which will give much A benefits and much more benefits. This is a competing rebuttal because you're not taking down their point, like you're not proving that their point is wrong, you're just showing something is better than that. So that is a kind of rebuttal where you're proving them wrong by showing there exists an alternative which is much more better. This is a competing rebuttal. In a competing rebuttal, you also have an additional burden of proving why your thing is going to be better off. So if in a clashing rebuttal, all you have to do is prove that that team is wrong. In a competing rebuttal, you have to prove another alternative exists, and you have to prove exactly why that alternative is going to be better. So you have an additional burden of proving why you have to prove to me why that alternative is going to be much more better than anything government has given me. So rebuttals also work on those two fronts. That's pretty much it for today. I have not prepared more material. Any questions for now? Anything related to debate because we're done now.
I would just like to appreciate your effort for putting it so much effort to train us in debate. That's it. Great work.
No worries, dude. No worries, dude. Thanks.
I have one
And-
doubt.
Yeah, go on. Go
When
on.
it comes to persuasiveness, if the argument isn't relevant, that means relevance is the most important part. If it isn't relevant, then none of the other values matter, right? Analysis, weighing, and
Obviously.
exclusivity.
Yeah, obviously. Like relevance is
So,
the precursor
do-
for any argument.
So if you're judging, do you penalize this thing if it's not relevant, or do we just ignore the entire argument?
Listen, there's nothing called penalize per se, right? You either credit or you, like in a normal when you're adjudicating something, you either credit the argument or you ignore the argument. There's nothing quote unquote called penalizing the argument. So if, like for example, if an argument does not make if it's not very well analyzed, it's assertive. You give it partial credit. You don't give it full credit. You give it partial credit because like there are some logical loopholes. If the argument is irrelevant, you give it zero credit simply because it's not related to the motion in the first place. There's nothing called quote unquote penalize. You just if an argument is relevant, you give it zero credit. You just ignore it.
Even if the argument is detrimental to your own case, you still don't penalize.
No, then you just ignore it. If they say something contradictory, you always ignore the second thing they said.
Yeah.
But in the speaker score, you can like minus a couple of marks. So
Yeah.
Rohan,
But as for the case as a whole, we don't penalize it. Only
I mean,
for the speaker.
it kind of weakens their case because obviously they're showing something contradictory in their own thing. So if they say X is going to happen, they later prove X is not going to happen. Obviously, it's going to hurt their own case. It's going to hurt the level of persuasiveness they had. So number one, disregard the second thing they said. Number two, even the first thing is not as persuasive because they were able to prove that it's not a good thing. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
It removes the persuasiveness from the earlier parts. Next question.
so can you send us the link of this Australasian debate competition or what?
Yeah, I'll send you all the links. I'll post them on Facebook. Just check it out. Like I'll post them by tonight.
No, I just didn't mean about this document, but the actual competition also, if possible, because I'm not aware of this. They would be fun if we can watch them.
You can't watch competitions like you. I'll let you know. Like you can't necessarily watch competitions. Sometimes they live stream. If something is going on, I'll put it up on Facebook or Discord.
Rohan. Yeah, Discord.
Yeah, most
All
probably.
links
Yeah,
and
sorry.
resources. Yeah.
Yeah. So everything mostly goes on Discord. I'll be posting it there. Anything else? Any other questions? All right, cool. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Joy, Shashwat, Raghav, Adu, like like the core team basically. There's a debate at 8. If any of you can show up, that'd be great.
I,
Abhijit too.
I'm gonna stop the recording now. Yeah.